Okay, so you're like cruising along on your project, right? Everything is going great, humming along, no problems, and then bam,
Yeah,
roadblock.
it happens.
Right. And like a big one too. So now what? Who gets to make that call, about how to actually handle it? That, my friend, is where project governance comes in.
Totally. It's all about having that structure in place for how decisions are going to get made, right? So
Mm.
that from day one, from that very first kickoff meeting all the way to that final deliverable, everyone's on the same page.
So we're not just like winging it.
Definitely not.
Makes sense. But we're also not trying to reinvent the wheel every single time we start a new project, are we?
No, most organizations already have these governance structures, right?
Hmm.
So project governance is about taking those company guidelines, those bigger guidelines, and really tailoring them, making sure they fit the needs of that specific project and the risks. It's customized.
Okay, so it's more like taking the company playbook and then like kind of adapting it for how we're gonna, play the game on this particular project, this particular field or whatever.
Exactly.
So this is like huge EE for the PMP exam, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a big deal. And the PMP exam, it's not just going to ask you, hey, what's the definition of project governance? It wants to know that you get it. Like you really understand why these structures are in place, how they play out in the real world.
Speaking of the real world, let's talk about those moments when things maybe don't go quite as planned.
It happens.
Right, because it totally does. So what happens when your team runs into some kind of problem and they can't figure it out on their own?
Well, then it's all about those escalation paths. And that's where those governance policies come in, right?
Yeah.
They're going to tell you exactly what to do.
Yeah. It's like, okay, we've hit a little bump in the road here. What's the plan? What do we do?
No.
But before we get into the policies themselves, let's break down these escalation paths a little bit more first.
Sure. So it's not as if every little problem that comes up,
Yeah.
you're immediately like waving a giant red flag and saying HELP. It's about looking at the situation and knowing exactly who to go to and in what order based on how serious the problem is. It's all predetermined.
So it's kind of like we've got different levels of uh-oh.
Yeah, you can think of it that way.
Right, like little uh-oh, medium uh-oh.
Exactly.
And those levels are decided ahead of time.
Exactly. And those are defined by those thresholds that we see outlined in those governance policies. So if you think about it, the policies are really like the rule book for the whole project. How decisions will be made, how it will be governed, that all comes from those policies.
Okay, I'm with you. Those policies are key. It's like, remember back in grade school when they'd have those fire drills? And it always seemed like the worst possible time, right? Like right in the middle of something super important.
Every single time.
But having those policies is kind of like, well, at least we have a plan for the fire drill. So everyone knows exactly what to do, where to go. Nobody's tripping over the tuba player or anything.
Right. And just like those fire drill instructions, right, those policies need to be clear, concise. Everybody on that project team needs to know exactly what's up.
So let's get into it. What exactly are we talking about here? What do these policies actually cover?
So many things. Communication is a big one. Like, who needs to know what? How often do they need to be updated?
Yeah.
How are we actually communicating? All of that.
Makes sense.
Then there's change management. Because let's face it, things will change. So having a plan for how to handle that,
Yeah.
absolutely crucial. Risk management as well. That's another biggie. Got to figure out what could go wrong and then how we're going to handle it if it does.
Right. So we don't even let those problems become problems.
Exactly. And then, of course, we've got those escalation paths and thresholds we were just talking about. Those are in there, too.
And this has all got to be like in alignment with how the entire company does things, too, right? Like the overall organizational governance structure.
100%. Yeah. We're talking about creating this cohesive environment. Everyone's working from the same playbook, even if they're working on totally different parts of the project.
Gotcha. So like everyone's on the same page from day one.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And by having all of these policies clearly written out, accessible to the whole team, it creates that transparency.
Right.
Everyone knows what the rules are.
Makes it a whole lot easier to deal with stuff when it comes up.
Yeah.
Okay, so back to those uh-oh moments we were talking about. So we've got our thresholds,
Right.
those levels. And let's say the team, they hit a snag, they have to deal with something unexpected, but they're able to handle it. It's within their, level of authority. But what about when they encounter something, some kind of problem that's bigger than that?
Then it's time to escalate. And remember, it's not about panicking. We've got a system.
Right.
We follow the predetermined path, take it up the chain of command, all nice and calm.
So maybe they go to the sponsor, or if it's really big, even the steering committee. Okay, but what if, and I hate to even ask this, but what if even they can't figure it out? what happens then?
Well, then it's time to get the folks in charge involved. The organizational leadership team.
Okay.
They're the ones who might decide, hey, we need to bring in more resources, or, you know what, let's adjust the scope a little. Or even in some cases, it's time to call it a day.
Wow. Okay, so even when you have this amazing project governance structure, things can still go wrong.
They can. But what that governance structure does is it gives you a way to deal with it. It's like, when you're sailing, right? You might run into a storm.
Oh, yeah, good analogy.
You can't always control the weather,
Yeah.
but you can make sure you have a skilled captain and a sturdy ship.
And that is what the PMP exam wants you to understand. It's more than just, here's how project governance works on paper. It's about the strategy.
Yes.
Okay, this is great. So let's talk about the project sponsor for a minute. What's their role in all of this? Because it seems like they're pretty important.
Absolutely. They're key.
They're the ones out there like championing the project, right? Making sure it has the resources it needs and like navigating all those, political waters that always seem to come up.
Absolutely. They're kind of like the bridge between the project team and the higher-ups in the organization, making sure the project stays aligned with those bigger goals.
And making sure everybody is actually on board with the whole vision too, right? Okay, so we've got our sponsor, got our policies, got our escalation paths.
It all works together.
It does. But let's bring it back to our listeners for a minute. So if they're listening to this, especially if they're getting ready for that PMP exam, what's the one thing they should take away from all of this?
It's that project governance. It's not just about, blindly following a set of rules.
Yeah.
Right? It's so much bigger than that. It's about having that system in place, that framework that actually helps teams to make good decisions, to really manage those risks, and at the end of the day, to actually achieve project success. And that doesn't happen without communication and collaboration.
And we can't forget about those real-world examples. Because the PMP exam, it's going to throw you some curveballs. It wants to see that you can apply these concepts to, a real project in a real setting.
That's right. And, it's really a team effort. Everyone has to be willing to work together and communicate for this to work.
It's like everyone on the project team, they're all part of this, this big dance. And knowing the steps is crucial.
Totally. So whether you're just diving into that PMP exam prep or you're about to kick off that next big project, here's the thing to remember. Project governance. It's not just another thing on your to-do list. It's what can take your project from, oh man, this could be a disaster, to, wow, this is amazing.
I love it. And on that note, we're wrapping up this deep dive into all things project governance. Remember, it's not about memorizing a bunch of rules. It's about really understanding why those rules exist in the first place. And who knows, you might even find yourself enjoying it a little.
You do.
Until next time, everyone, happy projecting.